must be getting to the end. Fellow archivists, aloha. I am painfully aware that I'm the only thing between you and lunch. And I don't know if they saved the best for last or if there was some ulterior motive to making this arrangement. Before I do anything else, want to thank you for your cooperation, for your assistance, for your kindness when we come knocking on your door. And you know, I talked to Galen a couple days ago. I said, well, what if I get nervous when I get there? And she said, it's a bunch of AHA friends. No biggie. So thank you for being AHA friends. And the last thing before I begin, when you invited us to think about our ancestors, a painful memory came for me, and I think we can learn from failures, right? So when I was a teenager, my mother came to me and said, hey, you know, your grandparents live just down the street. Would you like to go over and have your grandma talk to you about growing up in Germany and you know, life early on? And as a teenager, I said, nah. And so then I went off to college, and then later I was actually called to serve in Germany as a missionary for my church. And the second city that I lived and worked in was the city she was born in. And so I went to the archives, and I found her birth record, and I found where she lived, and where she was born even. And while I was in that city, she passed away. So take advantage of opportunities to visit with your ohana and your ancestors. I have lots of records, and I have lots of good memories about her, but here we go. I want to give you a little background. Welcome to our part of the world. It's wonderful to have you here. Let me tell you about this place. The first missionaries from the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints arrived here in Hawaii in 1850. Now that's 30 years after the first Protestant missionaries, but it's only 3 years after Brigham Young leads the body of the Latter-day Saints into Salt Lake. Okay? And about 15 years later, the church purchased 2 ahupua'a next to each other right here, so 6,000 acres. This became then the gathering place for the members of the church. And in 1919, a temple was built here and is located about a half a mile down the road. So 1919, this is its 100th birthday. So we'll be having some celebrations. We're not sure exactly what that will look like, but later this year, and that's a large part of the use of our archives right now, in fact, is preparing for that. Here's a little trivia that even most members of the LDS Church are not aware of. The first temple that was built after Salt Lake, the Salt Lake Temple, was finished in the late 1800s. The next temple to be built was the Hawaiʻi Temple. There are now 200 temples, but this was the 5th ever built. Okay, what's next? University. There's the picture of the temple. Built in the middle of a plantation. So here we go. The university, there was a vision that was kind of conceived in 1921 by one of the early leaders of the church. He saw actually some young children at the local elementary school pledging allegiance, and he said, I saw Filipino kids and Hawaiians and Japanese and Chinese. And he said, if we can do that with little kids, we ought to build a school where we can do that with grown-ups and teach them to interact and work well with others. And so after that church leader became the president of the church in 1951, 4 years later he came here and he said, okay, it's time, let's build the school. The ground was broken, and they knew it would take about 3 years to build, and there were church missionaries, labor missionaries who came and donated the labor from the mainland, but also from Samoa, Tonga, and other Polynesian islands. And it was interesting because they said, okay, it'll take us 3 years to build the school, so we'll start classes then. And the president said, we'll start this fall. And so the classes began in the building where I go to church, just over here on the other side of the temple, and in some temporary huts that had been used by the Army. And so that's how the school began. It was originally called the Church College of Hawaii, and then in '74 the name was changed to BYU Hawaii Campus, and then later shortened to BYU Hawaii. Here's, I like to give out trivia to students so they feel like their tuition money is just well spent. So here's your second bit of trivia. BYU Hawaii has more international students than any other four-year college in the United States. So there you go. What about us? The archives. So we house, of course, the University Archives. We have some artifacts collections. We have quite a large audio-video visual collection. And we just acquired several thousand more tapes from our TV production studio that we're trying to inventory. And we have a Pacific Islands research room. So that's kind of what we are made up of. We have some of the collections that specifically relate to our artifacts collections is what I want to focus on just for this presentation. And there's several families who've been very kind and either donated or we, in some cases, purchased materials. We have about 1,500 items in total. Most of those are Hawaiian. There are some Polynesian and Asian materials. The fact is you now know more than many of the members on this campus about our artifacts. We just haven't been able to get that information out. And so, I'm going to tell you about that apparently in a couple of minutes. 1963, so students came here in 55, but they got here and they had spent their last nickel literally in many cases to get here. They had nothing to live on. So they said, well, how can we provide jobs? And the answer to that was the Polynesian Cultural Center, which I suspect a fair number of you have been at and participated at. Thank you for helping our students to survive. When they decided to build that, they thought, well, we need some authentic artifacts. They had artisans from the islands come and build in their traditional local style, but they wanted some artifacts. So they bought some materials, a collection, which when I got here, just the McGuire collection. It was like, well, everybody knows the McGuire collection, right? So that was purchased by PCC, but then they realized, you know what, we don't have a good place to put this stuff, and we don't have any climate control, and any way to really house it and catalog it, so it was transferred over to the university. And so because everybody's talking about this McGuire collection, I just thought, well, why is a Scottish person interested in Hawaiian artifacts? And it turns out his father was actually Irish. But here's his full name, James Washington Lonoiao Ali'i McGuire. He was born in Kailua Kona in 1862. He was a personal attendant to Kapiolani and Lili'uokalani. Kalani. Went with them on their trip to Great Britain to the Jubilee. And it's his diary that is used by many students. That's in here somewhere. There it is. He Mokoleo Kokole, for learning Hawaiian. Okay? was custodian of Niolani Palace for a few years, and he had, through his mother, as a direct descendant of Kamehameha the Great. So that's who this Irish, Scottish person is who was so interested in these materials. So we have these wonderful materials, and we were trying to figure out what's the best way to work with them. How do we make them accessible? How do we help our own faculty and students understand that we have them? And what about students who or people who live in other countries who may never ever make it this long trek up here to Hawaiʻi, to the North Shore. So Galen and I were attended these two workshops. Wow, it's the microphone, I'm sure. These workshops last year, and we decided that maybe that would be the platform to enable us to showcase these treasures. And something that really caught my eye was the idea that you can, that this is designed really for indigenous collections, and they even have little, if you will, emojis or little icons that you can specify culturally sensitive information, whether it's religiously sensitive and so on. And so we built a little 0.5 version pretty quickly, and here's 0.5, all right? And you can go there now today. It is byuh-archives.org. And next week, or very soon, hopefully you'll find much more information. I've thrown in half a dozen items just manually so that we can see, kind of get a feel for where we're going and what we want to do. But we've had students populated an Excel spreadsheet with core metadata like the call number, the title, and the keywords, and some keywords from those 1,500 artifacts. And soon we will be uploading these preliminary records. So there's an example of, just a generic record, and these are some images. We have photos of most of these items, but we're going to be providing better images. It does give us some pretty good metadata in terms of categories and keywords, and there are fields for summaries of the information and a detailed description. So we're creating these little stub records, is what I'm calling them, which then our cultural expert, Kamoe Wak, will use to populate the description fields. And so he'll provide a detailed description in English, and then, I have to show you this. So in English and in Hawaiian, that's kind of the end of that. But that's not the end. It's actually really exciting and fantastic. But I was telling you that, some of our materials are just, okay, it's a bowl, and that's about all we know about it. But since almost the day I walked into the archives, I opened up a box and I found this little guy, or gal, whichever it is. And it's just fascinating for whatever reason. You holo mates were actually able to see. All right. I didn't think I was going to talk too long. So these are these are shark knuckles, and in this case, we just got information from a newspaper article in the Star Bulletin 1939. This is Mr. McGuire right there. They interviewed him 2 years before he passed away, and in fact, right here, see that? See those teeth? Those are our shark's teeth. And he talked in there about, because I just assumed these are shark knuckles are like brass knuckles, only worse. And so you use them the same way. Not so. Here's his explanation from the newspaper article. These generally consisted of a row of shark's teeth, but ours have 2 rows, right? Embedded in kailua wood kauila wood. The weapon was held concealed in the closed hand where it was retained in place by loops into which the fingers were inserted. So you have the teeth on the inside of your hand and the loops on the outside. And as approaching the enemy from behind, the leo o mano, which is what he called it, was slashed smartly across his bare abdomen with effective but unpleasing results. Okay, so here's a new and improved, a slightly better record. So here's a better photo, and here's a description that's has more detailed information, especially based on that article. How many times do you get provenance like that, where you get a detailed description from the person who found it? And so here's the place for the description. There's also a place here for comments as people find things, or they say, oh, my great-grandfather had one of those, or whatever. There is also a place under here to put community records, and so there's a Hawaiian record, and this is where we will place then the Hawaiian information for this particular item. As you study and find the information, you realize what you have, and we've been able to determine that a large percentage of our materials are actually stone. There are a lot of bowls and wooden objects. What's next? Well, we're going to retake the photos using a light box. We're going to add those descriptions in English and Hawaiian, and eventually we want to add 3D images so that, again, if you're in Samoa and we have something that is from your country, you can virtually interact with that and rotate it and enlarge it and spend time with it and do quality control. We're excited to finally make people aware of these just incredible materials that are in our collection, and thank you for coming out.
Thank you so much. That was great. Galen, do we have time for 5 minutes for questions? All right, I got the thumbs up. Does anyone have a question for any one of the panelists? Are you all just too hungry for lunch and you want to talk to them at lunch? No questions? All right. You guys want to say anything? Don't ask each other questions? All right. In that case, feel free to chat with any of the